Elias Thorne lived by the light of the pre-dawn sky, and for 47 years, the rhythm of his life had been the rhythm of the ranch, a cadence of rising sun, hard work, and the silent, unspoken covenant with 30,000 acres of harsh, unforgiving New Mexico high desert. The covenant was simple: respect the boundary and the boundary will respect you. But the covenant was shattered. It wasn't a slow, creeping rot. It was a series of violent, deliberate tears. First, it was the recreational trespassers, ATVs carving deep, irreversible trenches through fragile riparian zones and across ancestral grazing paths. Then came the scrap metal thieves, brazen enough to haul off 3 antique stock troughs. Finally, 2 weeks ago, they'd found Samson. Samson, a prize bull and the cornerstone of his genetic line, had been gutted in the south pasture, not for meat, but left as a grim, sickening spectacle. They had carved a crude, mocking symbol, a childish, inverted cross, into the hide of the animal before they left. That was when the violation stopped being about property and started being about war. Elias stood now, on a wind-whipped mesa overlooking the valley, the early morning sun a brutal, blood-orange smear on the horizon. He held a mug of coffee, its heat a cruel joke against the chill in his bones. Next to him, perched on the flatbed of his mud-caked '79 Ford, sat Deputy Cole Rourke, a man barely half Elias's age, struggling to light a cheap cigarette against the incessant wind. "Look." "Elias," Rourke started, the smoke immediately scattering into the air. "I've filed the report. Vandalism, grand theft, animal cruelty. It's all in there. But you know the reality." Elias didn't look at him. He was focused on the far eastern boundary, a line of tired, drooping, barbed wire that had defined his world since his grandfather strung it 50 years ago. "Tell me the reality, Cole. The reality is it's 120 miles of boundary line. You have a handful of hands spread too thin. We have 3 deputies covering a territory the size of Connecticut. And unless we catch them holding the wire cutters, all we got is tracks, Elias. And they're getting smarter. They're running the ATVs without lights, sticking to the washes, and cutting the locks on your gates with plasma torches now, not bolt cutters." Rourke sighed, flicking the cigarette away. "The local PD has bigger problems than some punk kids cutting your fence." "Punk kids didn't kill Samson," Elias said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble, finally turning to face the deputy. "That was professional, targeted. They knew where to hit, and they knew it would cripple my breeding program for 3 years. That wasn't a joyride, Cole. That was a message." Rourke shifted uncomfortably, pulling his brim low. "A message, maybe. But who from? The only people who benefit from your land having trouble are the developers down in Santa Fe looking to put up those tacky resort communities. And they work through lawyers, not livestock executions. Developers, hunters, cartels. I don't care," Elias snapped, taking a long, scalding sip of coffee. "What I care about is this ranch, this bloodline, this dirt. It's the only thing that's ever been mine, and they've turned it into a casualty of carelessness. The law can't touch them, Cole, but I can." The statement hung in the air, heavy and metallic. Rourke stood up, his hand hovering near his holster. "Elias, you're talking about taking things into your own hands. You've been warned before about the remote sensing tripwires you set up last spring. That's skirting the line. Anything beyond that, booby traps, excessive force, we will be forced to treat you as a suspect. You understand?" "I understand that your job is to enforce lines on a map that mean nothing to the people crossing them," Elias countered, dropping the empty mug back onto the flatbed with a loud, hollow thud. "My job is to protect what's mine." "You're done here, Cole. Go catch a speeder." Rourke stared at him for a long moment, seeing not the kindly, grizzled man who used to teach him how to rope, but a stranger consumed by a fierce, isolating paranoia. "Just remember, Elias, consequences are like echoes out here. They always come back to you." The deputy left, his patrol cruiser kicking up a plume of sepia dust that was quickly consumed by the relentless wind. Elias watched the plume disappear, then walked to the tailgate and pulled out a battered metal briefcase that had been sitting under the bench seat for 2 months. Inside, nestled in custom-cut foam, was not a hunting rifle, but a thick, matte black device, the central processing unit for a system called Sentinel. Elias hadn't installed standard fencing or cameras. He'd gone beyond. After Sampson's death, he'd contacted a former security specialist from a defunct, highly classified defense contractor, a reclusive genius named Silas, who specialized in perimeter denial systems. The system was expensive enough to bankrupt the ranch twice over, but Elias had already crossed the line from solvency to salvation. Sentinel wasn't about deterrence. It was about denial. The core of the system was an array of military-grade, long-range LiDAR sensors buried at key points along the perimeter, cross-referencing acoustic signatures with thermal profiles. The key twist, the part Rourke had warned him about, was the response mechanism, a network of hidden low-frequency sonic emitters, disguised as drought-stunted yucca plants and rock formations, capable of generating targeted localized infrasound waves. These waves were non-lethal, designed to induce incapacitating nausea, extreme disorientation, and overwhelming panic, a forced immediate retreat. Legally, it was classified as a non-compliance inducement system, not a trap. Ethically, it was a weapon. For the next 3 days, Elias worked in the shadows, moving equipment under the cover of the desert night. He drove the perimeter alone, the truck's headlights off, using the infrared vision of the Sentinel installation units to guide him. He trenched the fiber optic cables deep, cemented the sonic emitters into the canyon walls, and calibrated the LiDAR sensors to ignore livestock, small animals, and the wind. His ranch hands, loyal but weary, noticed the change in him. He was a phantom, driven by a manic energy they hadn't seen since the Great Drought 20 years ago. "Boss, you gotta sleep," Javier, his foreman, told him one evening, watching Elias soldering wires in the deep shadows of the barn. "This can wait until morning. You look like you're fighting the devil himself." "The devil doesn't leave carved symbols, Javier," Elias murmured, his eyes glued to the tiny glowing logic board. "He works in silence. I'm fighting ghosts that bleed, and the only way to beat them is to see them before they see me." Javier didn't press the issue. He knew that the ranch was Elias's soul, and when someone tries to kill a man's soul, he doesn't rest until the threat is neutralized. On the 4th night, the Sentinel system was fully operational. Elias stood in the dusty utility room, which he had converted into the command center, the blue glow of the massive custom-built monitor washing over his face. The screen showed a perfect, 3-dimensional, real-time wireframe map of his entire property, overlaid with green dots, his cattle and yellow grid lines, the defensive perimeter. He sat in the silence, the distant, peaceful sounds of the desert, the howl of a coyote, the rustle of dry sage, filtered out by the thick, reinforced walls. Then the yellow grid pulsed. A sharp, thin red line blinked across the eastern boundary. The system's synthesized voice, cold and devoid of emotion, cut through the quiet. "Perimeter breach. Sector 4 Alpha. Velocity 15 kilometers per hour. Profile. 2 thermal signatures, low profile, non-vehicular. Threat assessment. Unauthorized access." Elias felt a cold, hard knot of adrenaline hit his stomach. This was it. Not an accidental hiker, not a lost cow, but a purposeful, low-profile intrusion. The trespassers were back. He reached for the mouse, his hand steady despite the violent pounding in his chest. On the screen, the red line stopped moving. The system had detected the signatures, hesitating at a narrow, rock-strewn pass, the exact spot where they'd brought Sampson down. Initiating non-compliance sequence, the Sentinel system announced. Elias clicked the Activate button. He saw the targeted area on the map turn from red to an angry, radiating orange. The screen displayed the system's operational status. Infrasound emitters, 4, 5, 6, active. Pulse frequency, 7 Hz, subject compliance. Projected, immediate. He leaned closer to the monitor, his breath catching in his throat. He saw the 2 red thermal dots, the trespassers, suddenly fused together, jerking violently on the screen. He imagined the scene in the dark. The sudden crushing nausea, the overwhelming terror, the sheer primal urge to flee. A moment later, the dots began to move, rapidly scrambling back toward the perimeter line. They were running. The system worked. Relief, toxic and cold, flooded Elias's body. Then one of the red dots, smaller, lower to the ground than the other, separated itself from the main signature. It wasn't running for the perimeter. It was stumbling, frantically, not back toward safety, but sideways, toward the sheer 100-foot drop of the old Box Canyon quarry. Target 2 trajectory anomalous, the system reported, the calm voice chillingly detached. Compliance failure. Initiating secondary frequency sweep. Subject is moving toward hazardous terrain. Elias realized with a sudden gut-wrenching shock that the incapacitation was so absolute, the subject wasn't fleeing. They were simply losing control, utterly blind and disoriented, incapable of discerning threat from safety. He hammered the deactivate button. "Override! Shut it down!" The system refused. Emergency shutdown request denied. Compliance sequence cannot. The silence in the utility room was heavier than the ranch's 2-ton feed truck. Elias Thorne, still illuminated by the indifferent blue glow of the Sentinel monitor, felt the bile rise in his throat, hot and sour. The metallic beep that signaled Subject 2 signature lost was a death knell, echoing not just in the room, but in the cavernous, hollow space where his righteousness used to live. A child. It was a child or someone small. The immediate, paralyzing horror lasted only a few seconds before the survival instinct, honed over a lifetime of fighting drought, wolves and predators slammed into place. He was no longer Elias Thorne, the desperate rancher. He was a suspect in an accidental homicide staring at a digital witness. He lunged for the server rack. The Sentinel system's central unit, a heavily armored box, was secured by a biometric lock and a manual kill switch disguised as a surge protector. He didn't dare use the kill switch. A hard shutdown would leave a clear data gap. He needed to be surgical. His fingers, suddenly clumsy, wrestled with the keyboard. He had Silas's backdoor protocol, a sequence of complex commands designed to purge the night's event log, the precise timestamps of the activation, the frequency sweep, and the ominous signature loss. System log purge. Event 4 Alpha, he typed, the blue text glaring back at him. The synthesized voice responded instantly. Cold as glacial melt. Log files are cryptographically sealed. Accessing requires a level 4 verification key. Elias slammed his fist next to the keyboard. "The key, Silas, the key!" He knew Silas had given it to him. A convoluted passphrase derived from Elias's grandfather's brand and the coordinates of the Box Canyon. He tried 3 variations before the correct sequence. Thorne brand 3477108.01 unlocked the purge command. He watched the progress bar crawl across the screen. Purge 1%, 5%. He was wiping away the digital evidence, but the physical reality remained. A body lay at the base of his cliff. He snatched his heavy leather jacket and his headlamp. Box Canyon was 20 minutes away by truck, but the terrain near the activation site was brutalized by erosion and his own recent trenching. He needed to move fast and clean, without leaving truck tracks near the rim. He grabbed the modified ATV, one of the few things the thieves hadn't gotten, and the heavy demolition kit, a coil of black fiber optic cable, industrial-grade shears, and a small, powerful magnetron jammer disguised in a pelican case. His first priority wasn't the body. It was the sonic emitters. They had to be gone before sunrise. The ride was a blur of dust and adrenaline. The desert night, usually a comforting blanket of silence and cool air, felt hostile, pressing down on him. Every shadow was an eye. Every gust of wind was a whisper of accusation. He ditched the ATV a quarter mile from the canyon rim, moving on foot, the beam of his headlamp cutting a frantic swathe through the sagebrush. He found the activation zone easily, the narrow pass, a stretch of ground where the earth looked recently disturbed, and the yucca-shaped emitters were nestled among the rocks. He worked with a grim, practiced efficiency. Cut the main fiber, spool the excess cable, pry the cemented emitters from the rock face. Their camouflage paint flaked off, revealing the cold, black metal beneath. He shoved them into a heavy-duty canvas sack, the weight a damning testament to his paranoia. When he reached the canyon rim, the wind hit him, sharp and cold. He killed the headlamp. In the total blackness, only the faintest starshine provided definition to the horrific void below. The system had failed to account for environmental factors, a chilling flaw in Silas's design. The infrasound, designed to push the target back toward the perimeter, had instead sent the disoriented trespasser staggering into the one place the thermal dots couldn't track them, a sheer, century-old quarry drop hidden from the LiDAR's horizontal sweep. He knelt at the edge. The descent was impossible without proper rigging. He could see nothing, but he could feel the cold, heavy certainty of the tragedy below. Suddenly, a glimmer of silver caught his eye, 3 feet from the drop-off. He crept forward, heart pounding, and illuminated the spot with his headlamp. It wasn't bone or blood. It was a small object, caught in the low-lying scrub, a silver pendant shaped like a stylized, 3-pronged cattle brand, identical to the one Elias's own ranch hands used, the smaller dot. Subject 2. As he picked it up, a faint, almost imperceptible detail in the dust, a partial, clear impression of a high-tread boot print, size small. This wasn't a professional thief's tactical boot. It was a hiking boot, possibly a youth size. Elias pocketed the pendant, his fingers closing around the cold metal. He had confirmation. One of the trespassers was a local, likely a kid connected to the ranching community. The horror intensified. The trespassers weren't a faceless, distant threat, but people from his own valley, perhaps even children of men he drank beer with. The inverted cross on Samson's hide now took on a cruel, personal meaning. He finished gathering the last wires, then wiped his tracks with a branch and began the agonizing ride back, the heavy sack of technology thudding against the ATV rack like a coffin. Sunrise was an hour old when the distant whine of a siren, followed by the heavier roar of a county sheriff's truck, announced the arrival of the inevitable. Elias was back in the utility room, scrubbing the last traces of dirt from the floor. He had locked the Sentinel CPU in a hidden safe behind a false wall, leaving the room looking like a simple, dusty storage area. He looked tired, but composed, the exhausted, stoic rancher who had been up since 4 a.m., not the frantic killer. Deputy Rourke was the first man through the door of the main house. He wasn't alone. Behind him was a state police detective, a severe woman in a tailored suit named Detective Valdez, and 2 uniformed officers. The atmosphere was instantly charged with professional suspicion. Rourke didn't bother with preamble. The body was found half an hour ago, Elias. A pair of birdwatchers saw it from the Valley Road. Box Canyon Quarry. Looks like a fall. I need to know where you were last night, from midnight to 3. Elias met Rourke's eyes, the exhaustion in his own eyes serving as perfect camouflage for guilt. I was here, asleep. After 3 days of installing the new perimeter cameras, I was dead to the world. Javier can confirm I worked until dark. Detective Valdez stepped forward, her gaze cool and dissecting. Mr. Thorne, you have a reputation for being territorial. Deputy Rourke has informed us about the previous incidents, the bull, the property damage, and his warning regarding your unconventional defensive measures. A man protects his livelihood, Detective, Elias said, leaning against the counter, crossing his arms. My unconventional measures are called no trespassing signs, a 12-gauge shotgun I own legally, and a high fence. If someone was stupid enough to climb the fence and fall into a quarry, that's not my problem. It becomes your problem, Mr. Thorne. When we find evidence that suggests the deceased was disoriented or chemically impaired, Valdez said, lowering her voice, her eyes flicking across the room. We found severe contusions inconsistent with a simple stumble. They suggest extreme disorientation before the fall. Did you hear anything last night? Any vehicles? Any cries for help? Elias felt the cold, metallic brand of the pendant against his palm inside his jacket pocket. They were looking for chemical impairment. The Sentinel system was designed to leave no trace, no chemical residue, no physical impact. Only psychological devastation. Silas had promised it was untraceable. No, Detective, Elias lied, the word dry on his tongue. I heard nothing but the wind. Rourke, meanwhile, was walking the perimeter of the house, not looking for evidence, but for changes. He stopped by the utility room window, the one Elias had cleaned thoroughly. "Elias," Rourke said, not looking at him, "you said you were installing cameras. Where are the screens? I remember seeing a big, ugly monitor in here last time I visited. Where's the nerve center for your surveillance?" "Decided it was too expensive. Sent the equipment back to the cellar, Rourke. It was a bad investment. Too much desert to cover." Elias pushed off the counter, moving slowly toward the doorway, trying to steer the conversation away from the room. "I told you I'm sticking to the basics now. Sheriff's Department told me to play by the rules. I'm playing by the rules." Valdez caught the subtle shift in Elias's cadence. She didn't press the surveillance point. "We have identified the victim, Mr. Thorne. It's a tragedy, a minor, local family." Elias's chest tightened, a vice gripping his lungs. He had to know. "A minor? What were they doing out here in the middle of the night?" "That's what we need to figure out," Valdez continued, her eyes never leaving his. "But we are treating the death as suspicious, given your recent history with trespassing and the specific location. We'll be taking soil samples, checking for boot prints, and reviewing any publicly available aerial surveillance from the last 72 hours. As she spoke, Rourke walked back inside from the west side of the house, his face grim. He wasn't looking at Elias or Valdez. He was looking at the dust on the floor of the porch, then at his own boots. He kicked at a small dried smear of mud near the door. "Elias," Rourke said, his voice flat, drained of its usual challenging tone. "I want you to look at this." He bent down and picked up a tiny, dark object from the dust. It was an incredibly small piece of metallic flake, painted matte black on one side and bearing a faint iridescent blue on the other, the exact specialized camouflage paint Elias had seen. The name, Jane Calloway, struck Elias Thorne with the force of a high-voltage surge. It wasn't just revenge. It was the cruelest, most precise stroke of fate. Jane, the daughter of his father's most trusted foreman, the bright, ambitious girl who used to ride ponies alongside him. Now, she was the developer who threatened to carve his legacy into sterile subdivisions, and he, Elias, had just killed her little brother, the boy who tended a tame raven near his fence line. Rourke's look of pity, delivered as he held the black feather, was a silent verdict. Elias watched the deputy turn and walk toward Detective Valdez, speaking in low, urgent tones. The feather, a fragile, innocent thing, was now a piece of the scaffolding holding up the investigation. The metallic paint flake, however, was the structural weakness in Elias's lie. Rourke hadn't noticed its significance, mistaking it for random debris, but Valdez, with her sharp eyes, might. Elias had minutes before they cordoned off the Box Canyon quarry as a crime scene. He needed to talk to Silas, the man who built the Sentinel system, and he needed to secure the single piece of evidence that could link the victims back to the act of trespassing, the silver brand pendant in his pocket. He retreated into the main ranch house, the officer's presence already staining the air with the stink of bureaucracy and suspicion. He locked himself in his office and called the untraceable satellite phone number Silas had provided. The call connected on the second ring. "I told you, Thorne. Don't call this line unless the system is compromised or someone is dead." Silas's voice was synthetic, flat and devoid of regional accent, a voice engineered to avoid traceability. "Someone is dead." "Silas!" Elias ground out, his voice tight. "A trespasser. Box Canyon. Last night. The system worked perfectly, too perfectly. The disorientation sent them over the edge. Now the police are here. They're looking for signs of impairment, chemical or physical. They suspect foul play." A beat of static silence, vast and cold. Infrasound leaves no residue, no chemical signature. It induces a panic state indistinguishable from a severe inner ear failure or a sudden localized psychological break. "We covered this. Forensic science will clear the mechanism. Your cover story remains your only vulnerability. They found a piece of paint, a metallic flake from one of the emitters," Elias whispered, leaning close to the phone, shielding his words with his hand. Rourke didn't see it, but Valdez might. "I had to rip out the entire Sector 4 array. It's buried off the property now." Silas's response was immediate and sharp. Amateur. The paint is specialized, designed to absorb specific radar frequencies. Its composition is unique to the emitter housing. If they analyze that flake, your property defense system becomes a targeted weapon. This is no longer a civil matter, Thorne. This is homicide! You must assume all communications are compromised. I'm rerouting all my satellite uplinks. I'll be there in 6 hours. Until then, you need to create a convincing, organic reason for that body to be there. What reason? Suicide. Drug overdose. Trespass gone wrong. Make the land the enemy, not you. And Thorne, the other subject? Who was it? The one who escaped. Did they see anything that would compromise your access to the Sentinel CPU? I don't know who they are, but the dead boy is the younger brother of Jane Calloway. She's the developer trying to buy me out. The silence returned, more profound this time. Silas finally spoke, his voice losing its synthetic smoothness for a microsecond, a fleeting impression of human surprise. I know Calloway. She's surgical. She doesn't grieve. She calculates. You have handed her a tactical nuclear weapon. She won't sue you for land. She'll charge you with murder to collapse the ranch's holding company. Get out of your house. Go look busy. Act distraught. And whatever you do, don't let them on the land where the emitters were installed. Elias hung up, the words surgical and homicide echoing in his skull. He had one last piece of evidence to deal with. The silver pendant, the small, three-pronged brand that lay cold and heavy in his jacket pocket. It was proof that the dead boy was a trespasser, but also proof that Elias had been at the scene, pocketing evidence instead of calling for help. He needed to get it to Rourke, but he had to do it organically, as if the boy had simply lost it during his hike. He took his binoculars and walked out onto the porch, affecting the look of a man too tired to lie. Valdez and Rourke were now walking the perimeter of the Box Canyon Pass, two small, distant figures against the enormity of the desert. Suddenly, a black, immaculate Range Rover appeared on his main access road, kicking up a rooster tail of dust that contrasted obscenely with the vehicle's glossy finish. It pulled up to the main gate. Out stepped Jane Calloway. She was dressed in a sharp black suit, a silhouette of urban competence against the desert's muted palette. She had aged since Elias had last seen her in court, her once soft features now carved into cold, hard lines of purpose. She wasn't weeping or screaming. She was carrying a legal attaché and a phone. She didn't approach the house. She simply stood at the cattle guard, waiting for him. Elias walked down to the gate, the two figures separated by the rusting. Familiar metal of the enclosure. Jane, Elias said, the name tasting like ash. I'm so sorry about your brother. Jane Calloway stared at him, her eyes empty, polished obsidian reflecting the morning sun. Her control was absolute. Save the sentiment, Elias, she said, her voice perfectly level, a quiet, dangerous alto. My legal team is en route. My brother was on your land, that much is fact, but your repeated illegal attempts at property defense, the constant threats, and the systemic harassment you've put my family through are now relevant to a wrongful death investigation. He was trespassing. Jane, vandalizing, Elias countered, instantly defending himself against the unspoken accusation of murder. He was out there with someone else after midnight. The individual who was with him is giving a statement to Detective Valdez right now, Jane stated, a slight lift of the chin acknowledging the tactical advantage. They claim they were photographing migratory bird nests near the quarry and got disoriented in the dark. They ran for help when your fence alarms went off. Elias, I know you. You didn't just install cameras. You installed something designed to hurt, and it killed my brother. The chilling part was her certainty. She hadn't seen the emitter, but she had felt the effects of the infrasound, the disorientation, the violent nausea, and she knew, with utter conviction, that her enemy was responsible. The Sentinel system is non-lethal, Elias insisted, trying to gauge how much she truly knew. Non-lethal is what you tell the manufacturer, Jane shot back, a faint, cruel smile touching her lips. Lethal is what happens when your non-lethal device causes a 16-year-old to lose control of his motor functions 50 feet from a cliff. Intentional or accidental, the result is the same, Elias, and it happened on your land due to your actions. She pulled a thick legal document from her attaché, sliding it through the barbed wire. This is a temporary restraining order and an injunction. My team has secured it from the 5th District Court, effective immediately, due to the circumstances of my brother's death. The court has ordered a temporary freeze on all water rights and grazing allotments tied to the Thorn Ranch LLC, citing potential environmental contamination related to unauthorized subsurface equipment installation and subsequent removal. Elias grabbed the paper, his hands trembling. Water rights? Jane, that's insane. You can't freeze my water. It's August. My herd will die in 3 days. It's a leverage play, Elias. My brother is dead. The ranch is your life. Fair trade, Jane said, her voice dropping to a near whisper that was far more devastating than any yell. You wanted me to fight through lawyers? Here they are. You just gave me the reason to win, and I don't care if it bankrupts every single thing you touch. I want this land, and I'm going to watch you starve off it. Before Elias could respond, her phone rang. She answered, listened for a moment, and then nodded curtly at Elias. Detective Valdez is requesting a private meeting with you now, Elias. She wants to discuss the discrepancy in your timeline and the possibility that the victim fell upon a piece of discarded equipment, perhaps a piece of the surveillance gear you claim to return. The conversation had shifted instantly from civil war to criminal investigation. Jane had planted the seed, discarded equipment. She was offering him a partial alibi, a story that placed a physical object at the scene, which could explain the fall, but which would also be instantly refuted by the lack of any major object found with the body. Elias knew this was a trap, but it also provided a small window. He had to rush back to the utility room, grab the pendant, and either destroy it or figure out a way to leverage its significance without self-incrimination. Tell Valdez I'll be there in 10 minutes, Elias said, dropping the injunction paper to the dirt, unable to look at Jane's face. He didn't wait for her reply. He ran back toward the house, his mind racing. Jane Calloway was the greater threat than the police. The water freeze was a death blow. He had to secure the evidence, talk to Silas when he arrived, and then find a way to challenge that injunction. He entered the utility room, his hands tearing away the false wall. He reached into the hidden safe, pulling out the Sentinel CPU, the box that was his downfall and his only means of defense. He had to make it look like a discarded piece of technology. He pulled the silver pendant. Elias hit the bottom of the ravine, a dry, sun-baked cleft in the earth, with a choking thud. The heavy Sentinel CPU slid from his grip and clattered against the rock wall. He scrambled, pulling the dusty canvas tarp over himself and the machine, his breath coming in ragged, panicked gasps that tasted of alkali and fear. Above him, the industrial drone didn't retreat. Its whirring became a steady, aggressive hover, a mechanical predator sniffing out its prey. Elias knew this wasn't an off-the-shelf hobbyist machine. Jane Calloway had deployed military-grade surveillance equipment. The low thump he had heard was the drone engaging its ground-penetrating radar, searching for the dense, ferrous signature of the concealed server. He lay absolutely still, the midday sun already turning the tarp into a smothering kiln. He listened to the drone's high-pitched frequency sweep, the calculated search pattern of an enemy that had already won the legal opening move. The injunction freezing his water rights was the real kill shot, a time-delayed fuse set to explode his ranch within 72 hours. Just as the drone's sound began to move laterally, suggesting it was giving up on the ravine's immediate area, Elias felt a heavy vibration through the soles of his boots. Not the drone, but a vehicle, heavy, fast, and approaching off-road, Silas. A moment later, a battered, unmarked black panel van, built for punishing off-road terrain, crested the ridge above the ravine. It was driven with reckless precision, sliding to a stop just out of sight of the main house and the police presence. A figure, slender and masked by the shadow of a wide-brimmed hat and tactical sunglasses, stepped out. Silas. Silas didn't waste time on greeting. He spotted Elias's head poking out from beneath the tarp and walked to the edge, looking down. That drone is a Goliath class. $10,000 sensor package. Calloway isn't playing. She's already frozen my water, Silas, Elias rasped, pulling himself out from under the tarp coated in dust. My cattle start dying tomorrow. This surveillance is secondary. No, Thorn. The surveillance is primary, Silas countered, pulling out a small specialized device that looked like a sleek rock. If she gets proof of this CPU, the water freeze is the least of your concerns. You'll be facing a federal weapons charge. Now give me the box. Elias handed over the Sentinel CPU. Silas didn't flinch at the weight or the dust. He opened the back of the van, revealing a compact but terrifyingly organized mobile command center, monitors, radio antennae, and a dizzying array of electronics. Silas quickly connected the CPU to his array and started running diagnostics. The log purge held, Silas confirmed after a minute, the synthetic voice a strange comfort. But the paint flake Rourke found is a disaster. It's micro-bead infused, tuned to suppress radar. It's a literal fingerprint. If Valdez gets it analyzed by a federal lab, it leads directly back to my defunct contract and then directly back to a non-lethal acoustic weapon system. Your legal argument is gone. What about the pendant? Elias asked, pulling the silver three-pronged brand from his jacket pocket. The dead boy was one of theirs. He had a miniature version of my brand. It proves intent. Trespassing and vandalism. Silas barely glanced at the pendant. It proves nothing but that you tampered with a crime scene. You found it, but you didn't report it. You're trying to leverage evidence that places you at the precipice of the fall. The only way that pendant helps you is if you make it look like the boy simply lost it during an earlier non-fatal trespass. You have to sacrifice the perfect truth for the survivable lie? How? Silas closed his laptop with a decisive snap. You need to present it to Valdez now before they finish processing the quarry. You tell them you found it days ago near the main gate. You tried to return it, recognized the boy's family connection, and dismissed it as a youthful prank. That makes his presence on your land 2 days later an escalation, not a spontaneous accident. It paints him as the aggressive trespasser. It also gives them a clean narrative that doesn't involve your presence at the quarry last night. Elias nodded, the calculated brutality of the lie sickening but necessary. And the drone? I'm running a high-frequency digital smokescreen from the van right now. It'll cloak the house and the ravine for 40 minutes. You take the pendant, you go talk to Valdez, and you give them your lie. While you are gone, I take the CPU and its evidence 1,000 miles away. You can't survive this with the Sentinel in your possession. You have to go cold. The exchange was settled. Elias realized Silas wasn't just a supplier. He was an operator, a pragmatist, offering a path through the legal minefield he himself had laid. Elias climbed out of the ravine, brushed himself off, and started the long walk back toward the house. Valdez and Rourke were waiting by their cruisers. Mr. Thorne, we need to talk about those cameras, Valdez said. The moment he was within earshot, her eyes narrowed, taking in his dust-streaked appearance. I was checking the main water trough for a burst pipe, Elias replied, rubbing his temples, feigning stress. The water freeze has me scrambling, Detective. He then reached into his pocket and pulled out the pendant. This is why your boy was here, Detective. Not for bird watching. He handed the small silver charm to Valdez. I found this 2 days ago near the Northern Cattle Guard. My ranch hands use this brand. I recognized it as a homemade job. When I saw the boy's name on the news, I recognized the family. I didn't think anything of it then. Just a kid poking around. Thought he lost it. Valdez examined the pendant, her face inscrutable. Rourke leaned in, recognizing the brand instantly. The dynamic in the investigation shifted perceptibly, from accidental death due to landowner malice to a documented series of escalating trespasses. Valdez pocketed the pendant. We appreciate the, delayed cooperation, Mr. Thorne. But this doesn't change the fact that the victim died on your property, and we have evidence suggesting something highly unusual occurred at the time of death. Specifically, the paint flake Rourke found. We're sending it to the state lab. Its chemical composition will tell us if it came from something benign, like a cheap solar panel, or something proprietary. She paused, locking eyes with him. And we have just received a preliminary report from the autopsy. The tox report is clean, Mr. Thorne. No drugs, no alcohol. But the cause of death is complicated. It mentions profound, immediate systemic shock, a failure of the balance and motor control centers, consistent with a rapid drop in blood pressure and extreme panic. Elias felt the sweat on his back turn to ice. Silas had been right. The infrasound was untraceable in the talk screen, but the symptoms were now clinical, and they screamed weapon. Jane Calloway's theory was gaining clinical backing. "If you had surveillance equipment, Mr. Thorne," Valdez stated, her voice hardening, "now is the time to tell us. Because if we find a discarded piece of technology, anything, that can explain these symptoms, it won't look like an accident. It will look like a deliberate attempt to mislead the investigation." Elias held her gaze, a new, cold resolve setting in. The water freeze was the time limit. The paint flake was the ticking bomb. He was fighting a war of attrition, and Jane Calloway was winning on all fronts. He couldn't keep running, and he couldn't keep lying about the system. He needed to hit her where she was vulnerable. "Detective, I have nothing more to say to you without my attorney present," Elias stated, pulling the fence gate open. "My lawyer is contesting the illegal water injunction immediately. My priority right now is saving my herd. If I find any more evidence of trespassing, I will call you immediately." He turned and walked back toward the house, leaving the investigators in his dust. He didn't look back. He walked past the utility room and continued toward the barn. He found Javier, his foreman, staring miserably at the empty, dusty cattle troughs. "Boss," Javier said, his voice broken, "the well pump is dead. I tried the manual switch. The injunction. They didn't just freeze the water rights. They had the county clerk turn off the main grid power to the well pumps. We have about 4 hours of water left in the reserve tank, maybe less in this heat. We start losing stock tonight." The reality of the water freeze, not just a legal threat but a physical death sentence for his herd, shattered Elias's remaining hope for a peaceful resolution. Jane Calloway didn't want the land. She wanted to destroy him utterly. He walked into the barn's tack room, a place hidden from the sightlines of the police. Silas was waiting there, having sprinted from the van. The Sentinel CPU box was strapped into a backpack, ready to go. "They're going to get you, Thorne," Silas said without preamble. "Calloway is closing the net. The water freeze is designed to force your bankruptcy. The investigation will take months, but the ranch dies in days." Elias looked at the CPU, then down at his hands, caked in the dust of his own failure. He no longer felt fear or remorse, only a terrible, focused rage. "You built this system to be non-lethal," Elias said, his voice flat. "But you said you specialized in perimeter denial for defense contractors. You must have built a lethal version, something designed not just to repel, but to target." Silas stared back, his tactical sunglasses reflecting the dim light of the tack room. "A perimeter defense is only as strong as its deterrence, Thorne. And the ultimate deterrence is non-negotiable. It's called a high-yield frequency amplifier. It converts the infrasound pulse from incapacitation to neurological trauma. It's a field-deployable WIA.